The desert didn't feel empty that day. It breathed like a living thing humming with heat and memory. The wind tangled through the mesquite branches, whispering secrets only the stones could keep. By mid-morning, the sun had stripped the land bare, turning every rock into a blade of fire. The old road from Prescott was nothing but a pale scar of dust across the horizon, and somewhere along it lay a woman, still as a ghost. Kaelen Wolfmark spotted her from the ridge. At first glance, he thought she was gone, another soul swallowed by the desert. But the buzzards weren't circling yet, and the wind didn't carry the scent of death. He urged his paint horse closer, hooves careful in the shifting sand. The woman was young, mid-20s maybe. Her dress was torn, her lips cracked from thirst, and a small black camera hung from her shoulder, half buried in the dust. Kaelen slid off his horse, crouched beside her, and tipped his canteen. A few drops of water touched her lips. Her throat twitched. She was alive. "Don't die out here," he muttered, voice low and rough. "There are already too many ghosts." He lifted her easily light as dry reeds and carried her across the sand toward the canyon. When Willa Hart woke, the world smelled of smoke and wild sage. The ceiling above her was made of stretched deer hide, the seams glowing gold where sunlight crept through. The air hummed a low sound like wind praying against stone. Every part of her ached. Her wrists burned where ropes had rubbed raw. She turned her head and saw him, dark hair, bronzed skin, steady eyes like shadowed amber. He sat by the fire, sharpening a knife, as if the world hadn't ended outside. She pushed up on trembling elbows. "Who are you?" He didn't glance up. "The man who found you. You brought me here," she rasped. He nodded once. "Why?" "Because you were face down in the sand," he said, setting the knife aside. "Figured you'd rather be breathing." Willa blinked, still caught between dream and pain. Where am I?" Whispering Stone Canyon. The name meant nothing to her, but it sounded older than either of them. He poured water into a tin cup and held it out. She hesitated, then drank. The first swallow burned down her throat like fire, but she kept going until it was gone. He refilled the cup without a word. When she could finally speak, she whispered, "I had a horse and a wagon. There were men." "I saw the wagon," he interrupted. "Burned. The men were gone." Her stomach twisted. Cyrus Blackstone. His men. Images hit her in flashes, their laughter, the firelight, the old Apache beaten to the ground, a shout, then the blow that sent her into darkness. She lowered the cup, hands trembling. "They left me there." Kaelen said nothing. He only watched her like a wolf watching lightning calm and waiting to see what burns. By afternoon, she tried to stand. Her knees wobbled. Her head swam. Kaelen reached out, steadying her before she fell. "I'm fine," she snapped. "Sure," he said dryly. "You walk like a newborn foal." She glared up at him. "I'm 26, not 6. He almost smiled, a brief, crooked curve that vanished just as quick. "Then walk like it." She managed to stay upright this time, following him outside. The canyon walls rose around them in shades of red and gold, and the wind murmured through the cracks like a voice caught in prayer. "What's that sound?" she asked. "The canyon talking," he said. "Talking." He nodded. "When the wind's right, the rocks carry voices. My people say the land remembers everything ever spoken upon it." She looked up at the towering cliffs. "That's a lot to remember." "The desert's got time," he said simply. By nightfall, the fire burned small and blue. Willa sat wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of sage. Across from her, Kaelen carved an arrow shaft, each movement slow, deliberate, silent. She wanted to thank him, but the words stuck somewhere between her throat and pride. Instead, she asked softly, "What's your name, Kaelen?" he said. "Just Kaelen." He gave a faint shrug. "Was more once." "Don't use the rest, Kaelen," she repeated quietly, as if testing the name against the wind. "I'm Willa Hart." Kaelen gave a small nod, barely acknowledging it, and went back to carving the arrow shaft in his hands. The rhythmic scrape of the blade against wood filled the silence between them. After a while she said, "You live out here all by yourself, yes?" "Why, quieter." She let out a faint laugh. "You mean no one around to bother you?" "Exactly." I can see why she muttered. "You're a terrible conversationalist." That earned her a quick glance, brief, but with the shadow of amusement behind it. When the fire sank low and turned to embers, she found the courage to ask what had been sitting in her chest since she woke. "You're Apache, aren't you?" He didn't flinch. "Used to be." "Used to be," she asked, frowning. "What does that even mean?" "It means I worked for the army for a time. They didn't like the kind of Indian I was. My people didn't like the kind I became." Willa stayed quiet. She knew the kind of stories printed back east, savages subdued. Peace secured. She'd once taken photos of soldiers grinning in front of burned camps, thinking she was capturing history. But sitting here across from this man in the quiet heart of the canyon, the word peace tasted bitter. The wind picked up, humming through the stone like a sigh from the earth itself. Kaelen looked up, listening. "What's it saying?" she asked softly. He thought for a moment, eyes on the cliffs. "Says the desert keeps its own." The word sent a small chill down her spine. He stirred the fire, dropping another piece of mesquite wood into the coals. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow we'll see if you can stand without falling." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You're not exactly comforting, you know." "Didn't say I was." "Do you ever smile?" Kaelen glanced at her from across the fire. "When there's something worth smiling at. And what would that be?" He looked into the flames for a long moment before answering. Someone staying alive. Neither of them spoke after that. The canyon whispered its strange, hollow song, and the stars came out bright scattered embers across the sky. Willa lay back on the blanket, listening to the wind run along the cliffs. The sound wasn't quite words, but something older, deeper, like the desert was trying to remember every voice that had passed through it. She thought of the man sitting across from her, silent and unreadable, his face flickering in the firelight. She wanted to ask him more about the canyon, his past, or what would happen next, but her eyelids were heavy, her body too tired to obey. She heard him move to check the fire, his steps quiet on the sand. Then his voice, low and almost kind, drifted through the night. "Rest easy, girl. The desert's done worse to better folk than you." The wind carried his words away, blending them into the deep hum of the canyon walls. By the time the moon climbed high, only the whispering stones and the dying fire kept watch. And somewhere between the breath of wind and the rhythm of the earth, two lives that never should have met began to move toward the same horizon. The morning came cold and clear, the kind of desert chill that cuts right through skin. The fire had burned down to gray ash, and a line of sunlight slid across the canyon wall. Willa woke to the smell of coffee, or something close to it. The air carried the smoky scent of roasted mesquite pods boiling in a tin pot. Kaelen sat cross-legged by the fire, mending the strap of his saddlebag. He didn't look up when she stirred. "You made coffee?" she asked, her voice still rough with sleep. He grunted. "Something like it." She sat up and took the cup he offered. The drink was bitter smoky with a faint taste of dirt. She made a face. He didn't even glance up. Better than dying of thirst. Barely, she muttered, but it earned her the faintest hint of a smirk. They ate in silence, jerky for him, a strip of dried apricot for her. The only sounds were the crackle of fire and the far-off croak of a raven. "You always this talkative?" Willa asked. "Only around strangers?" "I'm not a stranger now, am I?" "You're less unconscious," he said flatly. She rolled her eyes and stood brushing dust from her skirt. "You're a real joy before breakfast, you know that." He shrugged. "Breakfast doesn't change who a man is." Well, maybe it should. The morning crawled by. Willa wandered near the canyon's edge, drawn to the strange carvings etched into the walls, swirls, animal shapes, and handprints pressed into the stone like ghosts. "What are these?" she called. Kaelen didn't look up from sharpening his knife. "Old prayers." She traced one of the spirals with her fingertip. Prayers for what? For rain. For strength. For peace. He paused mid-stroke. Sometimes he said quietly, "The asking is the gift." Willa frowned, unsure if that was wisdom or just a clever way to dodge her question. "You always talk in riddles," she said. "Only when people ask questions they already know the answer to." Kaelen replied, without looking up. She huffed and let it go. By midday, the canyon burned again under a merciless sun. The heat shimmered like smoke, and even the lizards disappeared into the cracks of the rocks. Willa sat on a flat stone, fiddling with her camera, but the shutter jammed tight. She sighed. "Guess I'm out of work." Kaelen watched her from across the fire. "That little box tells stories," he said. "It shows truth," she answered. He raised a brow. "Truth doesn't fit in a box. It does if you've got the right light." That earned her the faintest trace of a smile. "That what they told you back east?" "That's what I tell myself," she said with a shrug. He nodded once, as if that was answer enough. That afternoon they gathered firewood along the dry creek bed. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore, just quiet, like the space between two breaths. After a while, she asked, "You always been out here?" "No. Where'd you live before?" He hesitated. "With soldiers. Years ago." She stopped walking. "The army." He nodded. "They paid me to track my own people. Said it was for peace." Willa said nothing. The air between them thickened. When the war ended, he continued quietly, "Peace meant cages for us, and medals for them." She stared at the sand. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For being one of them," she said softly. Kaelen chuckled low. "You weren't there." "Still," she murmured. "I took pictures of soldiers once. Thought they looked noble. Thought it mattered." He studied her face for a long moment. "Maybe it still does. Depends what you do with the picture." By late afternoon, the heat broke into wind. Dust rolled through the canyon in lazy spirals, and Willa pulled her scarf over her mouth. "Does it always do that?" she asked. Kaelen nodded. "When the wind changes, the canyon remembers. Remembers what everything." He pointed toward the high stone walls where faint carvings shimmered in the dying light. Voices get trapped there. Every word ever spoken, carried by the rock. That's why they call it Whispering Stone. Willa tilted her head, listening. The air felt alive, full of sighs and murmurs, as if the earth itself was dreaming. "It really does sound like voices," she whispered. Kaelen nodded. "My grandmother Tala Moonfire used to say they tell the stories no one else dares to." Willa smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's what I should photograph, the things no one else dares to." He gave her a long, quiet look. Maybe. That night the wind picked up, and sparks from the fire jumped like tiny fireflies. Willa sat wrapped in her blanket, shivering even with the heat. She watched Kaelen tend the fire, careful and deliberate, every motion measured. "You ever get lonely out here?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Sometimes the wind talks enough. That's not an answer." He poked at the coals. "Lonely isn't the same as being alone." She thought about that for a moment. Back home, people fill their loneliness with noise, music, talk, whiskey. Out here, he said, we fill it with silence. She smiled faintly. "Then you must be rich in it." He looked up, a flicker of humor in his eyes. "Some folks collect money. I collect quiet." A coyote's howl echoed through the canyon. Willa jumped. Kaelen didn't move. "He's talking to another one," he said. "What's he saying?" "Probably asking if there's food left." She smiled. "You make even coyotes sound practical. They don't lie, they don't pray, and they don't take more than they need," he said. "That's wisdom enough." Willa gazed into the fire. "You talk like a preacher, but one who doesn't believe in heaven." Kaelen thought about it, then said, "Maybe heaven's just a place without fences." She nodded slowly. "Sounds good enough to me." Later, when the night grew deep, she lifted her broken camera and turned it in her hands. The metal was cold. The glass cracked, but habit made her lift it to her eye. Kaelen noticed. "What do you see?" She peered through the ruined lens. "The fire. You. The canyon behind you. That's all." She lowered the camera, meeting his gaze. "That's enough. That's enough." Kaelen studied her for a long moment, then turned back to his carving. His voice was quiet, careful. "The desert remembers what it sees." "I hope it remembers kindly," Willa murmured. "The desert doesn't do kind," he said. "It does honest." She smiled into the darkness. "Then maybe we'll get along." The fire sank low until the canyon was all shapes and shadows. Kaelen sat still, watching the flames die. Willa drew her blanket tight, listening to the strange, endless murmur in the cliffs. Somewhere in that sound, she thought she heard faint laughter, distant like a memory caught in stone. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Kaelen nodded slightly. "Voices. Old stories." "What kind of stories?" "The kind that start with pain," he said, "but don't end there." She didn't ask more. The wind carried their silence and laid it gently across the rocks. Above them, the sky stretched wide and endless, scattered with stars like shards of broken glass. And for the first time since waking in that cruel desert, Willa didn't feel afraid. She was still sore, still lost, still unsure of what tomorrow would bring. But the man sitting across from her, quiet and steadfast, had pulled her back from death. Maybe that meant something. The canyon kept whispering, ancient, unbroken, and somewhere in its song was the faint echo of laughter, hers and his, mingled and carried away by the night wind. Morning came sharp and red. The sun poured over the ridges like molten iron. Kaelen was already awake, tightening the straps on his horse. Willa blinked against the glare, stretching until her muscles protested. "You going somewhere?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Out past the ridge. Need to check the water hole. Want company?" "Not really." She crossed her arms. "Wasn't asking for permission." He finally met her gaze, a flicker of resignation in his eyes. "Then try to keep up." They rode in silence along a narrow trail cutting through the sun-baked cliffs. Dust rose around the horse's hooves, shimmering like ghosts in the air. "This place always this quiet?" she asked. Kaelen's answer came low. "Quiet's when things live. When you stop hearing it, something's dead." She couldn't tell if he was joking or warning her. By the time they reached the ridge, the heat was already heavy. Below them stretched a wide brown valley dotted with thorn brush and the faint glint of metal. Willa shaded her eyes. "What's that?" Kaelen followed her gaze. Smoke. Movement. The glint of sunlight on rifles. He muttered a curse in his native tongue. They're back. They crouched behind a ridge of rock, peering through the wavering heat. Willa raised her cracked camera lens, squinting. Even through the damage, she could see them miners. A dozen or more working around a half-collapsed shaft. Fresh wagons stood nearby, piled with crates of blasting powder. Kaelen's voice was tight. "Cyrus Blackstone." The name hit her like a stone to the chest. She lowered the camera. "He's mining here." Kaelen nodded grimly. "On sacred land. The bones of my people lie beneath that mountain." Willa's throat went dry. "He told everyone it was empty, just silver and rock." Kaelen's jaw flexed. "Silver makes men deaf." She looked at him, then back toward the canyon floor. "We can't let him do this." Kaelen turned to her eyes, steady. "And what would you do, photographer? Take pictures until he stops." "I can show proof," she said firmly. "If I can get these to the paper or to Marshal Silas Granger, someone will listen." He shook his head. "Proof doesn't matter to men who already know who they want to blame. You sound like you've given up. Maybe I just learned when to stop fighting the wind." She set her jaw. "Well, I haven't." Kaelen held her stare for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. "You're stubborn." "Thank you." It wasn't a compliment. They rode back to camp in silence. It wasn't the easy quiet from before it buzzed between them like a rattlesnake waiting to strike. At the fire, Willa slapped the dust from her skirt. "We need help," she said. Kaelen didn't look up. "Help doesn't ride this far west. Then what, you'll just let him take everything?" Kaelen didn't answer. He only poked at the fire, his jaw tight. Willa scowled and tossed a pebble into the flames, sending sparks bursting into the night. "You know," she said, "for someone who acts so old and wise, you sure give up easy." He turned his eyes on her, sharp as flint. "I quit digging graves that don't belong to me." The regret hit her the moment she saw the shadow cross his face. He turned away, checking the rifle laid across his lap. Every movement was clipped precise, like he was keeping his hands busy to silence his thoughts. The heat of the day finally broke, replaced by the cool breath of evening. Then from the ridge above, a rough voice called out, "Anyone still breathing down there?" Willa looked up to see an old man on a mule, gray-bearded, his hat so worn it had given up the fight years ago. Kaelen groaned softly. "Lord save me, not today." The trader grinned wide as he rode closer. "Well, I'll be damned. The desert didn't eat you yet, Wolfmark." He squinted at Willa. "And who's this fine lady still got all her parts attached?" Despite herself, Willa smiled. "Willa Hart." "Pleasure," the man said, tipping his hat. "Name's Buck Rollins. Trader of whiskey lies, and occasionally useful information." Kaelen muttered. "Mostly the first two." Buck laughed as he dismounted. "Still got that sunshine personality, I see." He dug into his saddlebag and pulled out a bottle. "Peace offering for old time's sake." Kaelen didn't take it. "We're sober." "Speak for yourself," Buck said, handing it to Willa. "You look like you could use a drink, sweetheart." She shook her head, smiling. "Not today." Buck sighed dramatically. "Two saints in one canyon. No wonder even the coyotes steer clear." When they told him about Cyrus Blackstone. The grin vanished from his face. "That snake again, huh?" Heard he's been greasing palms in Prescott. Got himself a shiny new license, legal and holy, they say. Willa felt her stomach tighten. Then no one's going to stop him. Buck's grin returned, sly this time. No unofficial one. But paper's still a kind of weapon. If the lady here's got that camera, folks might listen once they see what she caught. Kaelen shook his head. And who's going to carry those pictures out? Silas Granger won't ride 20 miles for a dead Apache's bones. Buck chuckled. Then you'll need someone who can talk fast enough. Kaelen sighed. Volunteering's a strong word, Buck said, grinning wider. Let's say I'm curious. By dusk, the three of them sat around the fire. Buck spun half-true tales about the railroad and a preacher who stole his own church bell. Willa laughed until she coughed on the smoke, and even Kaelen's mouth twitched with the ghost of a smile. Buck leaned back, eyeing the pair of them. You two married? Willa choked. What? No, Kaelen, deadpan. I'm too old for her. Buck snorted. How old's too old? Kaelen shrugged. Old enough to know better. Willa shot him a glare. Old enough to be grumpy before sunrise. Buck howled with laughter until he nearly tipped over. You sure you ain't married? You sound like every couple I've ever met. Kaelen poked at the fire, ignoring him. Willa tried not to smile, but failed. For a while the canyon echoed with laughter instead of wind. When the fire burned low, they began to plan. Willa would sneak into the mining camp at night to take the photographs. Buck would stay behind, ready to ride with the evidence if things went bad. Kaelen would cover them from the ridge with his rifle. It's dangerous, Kaelen said quietly. Willa met his gaze. So is doing nothing. He studied her face in the flickering firelight, stubborn, scared, but steady. The same woman he'd carried out of the sand days ago, only stronger now. Finally, he nodded. All right, but you move when I say. No hero stories. Understood. Good. He checked his rifle. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be loud. Buck grinned. Just like a honeymoon. Kaelen shot him a glare sharp enough to cut stone. Willa rolled up in her blanket, stifling a laugh, as Buck hummed a tune about whiskey and sin. The canyon swallowed the sound whole. Long after they both fell asleep, Kaelen sat awake, eyes fixed on the dying fire. The wind moved through the stones like fingers over old scars, whispering in the language of ghosts. If the land truly remembered everything, then tomorrow it would remember something new, a fool of a man following a stubborn woman straight into trouble. He swore he was done chasing. Kaelen glanced over at her sleeping shape beside the ashes, the faint silver glint of her camera resting by her hand. Stubborn, he murmured under his breath. The wind caught the word and carried it off, folding it into the canyon's long, ancient song. When dawn bled over the red stone cliffs, it found three unlikely souls readying themselves for war. Not for gold, not for vengeance, but for something far rarer in the West truth. The moon rose pale and thin, a ghostly coin lost among the canyon walls. The wind had gone still too still, and even the coyotes held their breath. Kaelen didn't like it. Silence that deep meant trouble was waiting. Down below, the silver mine squatted like a wound carved into the earth, lanterns flickering between the broken scaffolds. Men moved like shadows, their laughter sharp and mean. The stink of sweat oil and greed drifted all the way up to the ridge where Kaelen lay, rifle steady in his hands. Beside him, Willa checked her battered camera one last time, her fingers trembling just a little. She had tied her hair back, smeared dust across her cheeks, and dressed in the rough work clothes Buck Rawlins had dug out from his mule's pack. In the dim light, she looked like she belonged, except for her eyes. They still held too much light. You sure you can do this? Kaelen asked quietly. Willa shot him a look, chin tilted. If I survived 2 days of your cooking, I can handle this. He grunted. You're brave for someone who's never been shot at. Then let's hope I stay that way. She started to move, but he caught her wrist, his hand firm and warm. When I whistle, you stop. When I tell you to run, you run. Understand? She nodded, lips curving. Got it, Sergeant. He gave her a dry stare. Don't get promoted before you make it back. Willa smirked and slipped down the path quiet as the moonlight itself. The gravel crunched softly under her boots, but she remembered what Kaelen had told her. Walk like you belong. If you acted like a thief, the land would treat you like one. At the edge of the camp, she crouched behind a stack of crates. Voices drifted through the still air. Load the powder by dawn, one man barked. Cyrus wants a full blast by sunrise, says he'll hit the mother vein tonight. Willa peeked around the crate. Cyrus Blackstone stood near the mine entrance coat, white as bone hat pulled low. He looked cleaner than the rest, but the way the others flinched when he spoke told her exactly what kind of clean it was. She raised her cracked camera, adjusted the lens, and clicked. The shutter stuck halfway, grinding like teeth. She froze, holding her breath, but no one turned. Again she pressed. 1 shot, 2, 3. Lantern light flashed off the silver plates inside proof captured in glass. Then a voice behind her drawled, Well, well. What do we have here? A hand clamped down on her shoulder. Kaelen heard the scuffle before he saw it. Down below, Willa twisted in the miner's grip, kicking to break free. The man shouted, others turned, and the camp exploded into chaos. Kaelen's rifle was up before thought even hit him. He fired, not to kill. Not yet. The bullet splintered a post inches from the miner's head. The man dove for cover. Run! Kaelen's shout echoed off the canyon walls. Willa bolted. Lanterns swung wild. Men yelled. Cyrus's voice cracked through the noise like a whip. Find her! She's got a camera! Kaelen was already moving, sliding down the slope in a rush of dust and stone. Willa darted between tents, clutching the camera tight against her chest. Gunfire tore the air bits of rock, slicing her cheek. She dove behind a wagon just as Kaelen reached her. I got the pictures, she gasped. Good. Try not to die with them. They ran for the ridge. Footsteps, pounding shouts behind them, growing louder. Then came a sound that froze Kaelen mid-stride, a sharp hiss. His eyes snapped toward the mine entrance. A fuse burned bright, snaking toward a line of powder kegs. Damn it, he hissed. He's blowing the shaft, Willa's voice trembled. Then we have to go. Not that way. He pointed to a narrow side tunnel half hidden by boulders. They ducked inside, swallowed by darkness. The air was thick with dust, the ground trembling underfoot. Willa coughed, stumbling. Kaelen grabbed her hand, pulling her forward. Behind them, the mine erupted. A thunderous crack split the world open. Heat and wind slammed through the tunnel like a living thing, knocking Willa against the wall. The canyon roared, then fell silent. Willa's ears rang, and her lungs burned. When the roar finally faded, only the hiss of settling dust and the groan of collapsing beams filled the silence. Kaelen steadied her, his breath rough and shallow. Blood ran down his shoulder, dark against the dust, but he didn't look at it. You all right? He asked. I think so, she wheezed. You're bleeding. He glanced down, unconcerned. Not enough to matter. Let me see. Later, he said, but her voice left no room for argument. Now. She tore a strip from her sleeve and pressed it against the wound. He hissed under his breath. You're bossy for someone who nearly got herself buried alive, he muttered. Someone's got to make decisions while you're busy playing the hero, she shot back. That earned a faint grin. Didn't know 26-year-olds gave orders. She tightened the cloth. Guess you're learning new things in your old age." He almost laughed, then winced when she tied the knot. "You sure you're not part Apache?" "You bind wounds like my grandmother." Then she must have been right most of the time. That made him laugh low and rough like gravel in his chest. They followed the tunnel until a faint blue light appeared ahead. The passage opened onto a narrow ledge halfway up the canyon wall. From there they could see the mine below, flames devouring the wreckage, black smoke curling into the star-flecked sky. Willa leaned against the rock chest, heaving. "Did we just destroy a mine?" Kaelen looked down at the burning chaos. "No," he said. He did. "What now?" "We leave before he figures out we're still breathing." She nodded, still catching her breath. Then she looked at him. "You saved me. You had the camera. I could have gotten out on my own." He gave her a dry look. "You'd have tripped over your own courage." She smiled, weak but genuine. "And you'd have died trying to fix it." His mouth twitched. "Maybe." They made their way along the ledge, climbing toward the ridge. Every step burned, every breath dragged grit into their lungs, but neither complained. The canyon glowed red like a forge below them, painting their faces with firelight. When they reached the top, Willa dropped to her knees, gasping. Kaelen stood a moment watching the flames die down in the valley. He looked older than she'd ever seen him, but steadier too, like something inside him had found its ground again. "You think they'll chase us?" she asked. "Not tonight? Even brave men fear fire." She nodded, exhaustion mixing with adrenaline. "For the record, you run pretty fast for an old man." Kaelen shot her a look that could have been amusement or warning. "And you talk too much for someone still alive." Willa grinned. "So we're even then?" He didn't argue. Below them, the last of the flames flickered out, swallowed by darkness. The wind returned, sweeping through the canyon in long, low sighs. Willa closed her eyes, listening. "What's it saying now?" she asked softly. Kaelen studied the smoke curling toward the stars. "Says the land forgives slower than people think." She was quiet for a while, then whispered, "Maybe it forgives faster when someone tries to set it right." He didn't answer, but the look he gave her, half respect, half something unspoken, was enough. They stood together on the ridge, night, stretching wide and silent around them, the fire's last glow fading below. For the first time in years, Kaelen felt the wind of his homeland, not as a ghost whispering from the past, but as something alive, warm, and forgiving. By sunrise, the canyon was still again. Smoke from the mine drifted low over the valley, thin as breath from a dying ghost. Willa stood at the ridge's edge, her cracked camera clutched tight, her hands raw from climbing. Below the mine lay in ruins nothing but blackened timbers and the bitter scent of ash. Kaelen tightened the bandage on his shoulder and checked his rifle. "We should move. If Cyrus lived through that blast, he'll come looking." "The pictures are safe," she said. He nodded once, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Then we're done here." "Done," she echoed. "You think he'll stop just because the mine's gone?" Kaelen met her eyes. "No. But it's his turn to dig." She didn't like the sound of it, the quiet finality in his tone, the way he could shut his feelings away like closing a door. When she pressed, Kaelen only said, "You can't change the desert by shouting at it." Willa stared at him, dust clinging to her lashes. "Then I'll write it down," she said quietly. "Somebody will listen." He almost smiled. Someone always listens. Doesn't mean they hear. They packed what little they had left and started north. Buck Rollins had already ridden out before dawn, promising to reach Prescott with the photographs. Willa prayed the old trader's luck would hold. By mid-morning, they reached a narrow pass where the canyon opened into the flatlands. That's when the riders appeared, dust first, then 6 men on horseback. guns drawn riding hard from the south. Cyrus Blackstone led them. His white coat was scorched and torn, his face dark with fury. Kaelen shoved Willa toward a jagged rise of rock. "Stay down." Gunfire cracked across the plain, echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. Kaelen returned fire, clean, calm, deliberate. 2 shots dropped the lead horse, sending its rider tumbling. The others wheeled their mounts, regrouping in the dust. Cyrus's voice rang out cold and sharp. "You can't hide, Indian. The law's on my side." Willa peeked over the rock. "He's bluffing," she hissed. Maybe Kaelen muttered as he reloaded. "But bullets don't care who's lying." He fired again, driving them back. When the noise faded, they sprinted toward the creek bed, boots sliding in the gravel. Then another shot split the air close mean. The slug hit the ground inches from Willa's foot. "Hold it right there." Different voices this time. Steady, commanding. 4 cavalrymen rode in from the ridge, rifles raised. Their sergeant looked barely old enough to shave his face, sunburned, but sharp with authority. "What's going on here?" he barked. Cyrus spurred his horse forward, pointing at Kaelen. "That's the man Sergeant Apache Raider burned my mine and killed my men." Willa stood before Kaelen could speak. "That's a lie." The sergeant frowned. "Ma'am?" She stepped closer, dust streaking her cheeks. "I saw everything. Cyrus Blackstone's men were blasting sacred land without a permit. He started that fire, not him." The young officer's expression wavered. "You got proof?" Willa lifted the cracked camera. "Right here." Cyrus laughed a dry, hateful sound. "She's lying. You think anyone's gonna believe a girl and an Indian over a man of business?" Kalen's voice came low and even. Wouldn't be the first time truth lost to money. The sergeant hesitated, eyes darting between them. Then he sighed. "All right, everyone's coming to town. Marshal Granger will sort this out." They rode under guard toward Prescott, the desert heat rising like glass around them. The town shimmered in the distance, its buildings crouched along the main street, half dust and half mirage. As they entered, folks stopped what they were doing to stare. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer fell silent. Children watched from behind porch posts. Kaelen dismounted without a word when they reached the jailhouse. A soldier shoved him forward. Willa started after him, but the sergeant blocked her path. "Marshal will hear both sides soon enough," he said. Kaelen turned once, eyes meeting hers. "Don't waste your breath," they said without sound. Inside, they locked him in a small stone cell with one narrow window and a cot too short for his frame. Dust floated through the late light. Deputy Amos Pike brought water and muttered, "Best stay quiet. Folks around here spook easy." Kaelen said nothing. He'd heard that line too many times before. Hours later, Willa burst through the door of the Copper Creek Law, her voice hoarse with anger. "I've got proof photographs from the mine. Marshal Silas Granger, a broad-shouldered man with gray in his beard and patience in his eyes, took the camera gently from her hands. "These from Whispering Stone?" he asked. She nodded. "Cyrus Blackstone's men were using explosives. I saw it." He studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "Funny thing, you're the second one who's come to me about Blackstone today." He opened a drawer and pulled out a small stack of glass negatives. "Old trader named Buck Rollins dropped these off earlier." Willa leaned in, breath-catching. The plates showed Cyrus and his men unloading dynamite beside the canyon wall. Her shoulders sagged in relief. "Then you know I know enough?" Granger said, a small smile tugging at his mouth. "And I know that man you brought in didn't start the fire." "Then why is he still in a cell?" she demanded. Granger sighed. "Because folks around here don't change their minds easy. takes more than truth to wash out fear. It was near dusk when Willa was finally allowed into the cell block. Deputy Pike led her down the dim hall, muttering, "You got 10 minutes." Kaelen sat where she'd left him, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the stone wall as if it might speak back. Willa stopped outside the bars. "You look comfortable," she said. He looked up, the faintest smile tugging at one corner of his mouth. "Cage fits better than most. Don't joke about that." "I'm not." She stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. "Marshal Granger knows the truth. You'll be free soon." Kaelen studied her eyes, calm and searching, like he was weighing how much of that she actually believed. "Truth's heavy, Willa. Folks drop it when it burns their hands. Then we'll hold it for them." That earned her another small smile. "You talk like someone who's never been disappointed. Then maybe you should stop expecting it," she said. For a long time, neither spoke. Dust hung in the air, shimmering in the sunlight, cutting through the narrow window. Then she reached through the bars, her fingers brushing against his. "You once told me the desert remembers everything," she whispered. "Maybe it'll remember this too." He didn't move at first. Then slowly he turned his hand until his fingers closed around hers. "The desert forgets faster than people do," he said quietly. "Then I'll remember for both of us." Deputy Amos Pike cleared his throat. "Time's up, miss." She let go, stepping back as Kaelen rose to his feet. "Don't worry," he said softly. "I've been in tighter corners. Try not to make a habit of it," she replied, trying to smile. The next morning, the cell door creaked open. Marshal Silas Granger stood there, hat in hand. "You're free to go." Kaelen stood slowly. "That all Cyrus Blackstone's cooling his heels in the next cell," the marshal said. "Turns out lying to the army don't pay as well as it used to." Kaelen gave a short nod. "About time something did." Outside, the sunlight hit him full in the face. Willa stood waiting by the hitching post, her hair loose in the wind. She smiled when she saw him. "Told you," she said. Truth just needed a little push. He looked at her dusty, tired, and stubborn, smiling like she hadn't slept in days. "You didn't just push," he said. "You shoved the world sideways. Somebody had to." He almost laughed. "Maybe you're not a kid after all. Glad you finally noticed." He touched his shoulder where her bandage still held. "Took a bullet and a jail cell to teach me. Guess I learned slow." "You'll catch up," she said with a grin. They walked side by side down the main street, townsfolk pausing to watch in silence. For once, Kaelen didn't mind the eyes on him. Let them stare. Let them remember. Behind them, the wind rose, curling through the alleys, carrying the faint scent of sage and the breath of a canyon that refused to stay silent. For the first time in years, the weight he carried felt lighter, not because it was gone, but because he wasn't carrying it alone anymore. Autumn came slow to Arizona. The skies deepened, the wind softened, and the scent of rain drifted down from the far-off mountains. Willa Hart sat on the porch of the Prescott Gallery, sunlight warming the boards beneath her boots. Inside, people moved quietly among the rows of photographs, her photographs. The Whispering Stone Collection. From her seat, she watched townsfolk murmur before the framed images, a canyon glowing at dawn, a cracked lens catching dust and firelight, the silhouette of a man standing alone against an ocean of red rock. They didn't know his name. She hadn't written it. In the corner of the display rested her broken camera set upon a white linen cloth like a relic. A small brass plaque beneath it read, "Truth is what survives the dust." A woman paused beside her on the porch. "You took those?" Willa smiled. "Some of them took me first." The woman chuckled softly, unsure what that meant. then drifted inside. Willa stayed where she was sipping cold coffee, her eyes on the horizon. It had been 6 months since the fire in the canyon. 6 months since she'd last seen Kaelen Wolfmark. Marshal Granger had offered him work as a scout, maybe a guide, but Kaelen had only nodded, then disappeared into the desert before sunrise. No goodbye, just the quiet certainty of a man walking back to where he belonged. She told herself that was enough. The world didn't always owe farewells. But sometimes when the wind came down off the ridge and the air smelled of stone and sage, she could almost hear the canyon again. A low hum like a heartbeat, like his voice traveling on the breath of the land. The first letter arrived in early November. It wasn't really a letter. "Depends who's counting," Kaelen said, with a hint of a grin. Willa nudged his arm. "Then I'll start counting from now on." For a while, neither spoke. The canyon wind rose again, humming deep and low through the stone, a sound older than words. "You hear it?" she whispered. Kaelen tilted his head, listening. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Sounds different tonight. What's it saying?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Says the land's got room for 2 voices now." Willa looked up at the stars, cold and sharp, glittering like silver dust scattered across the dark. Something settled inside her. Not excitement, not even relief, but peace. They stayed like that for a long time, shoulder to shoulder, beside the fading fire. The cold crept in around them, but never quite touched them. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer than the wind. "I missed this place." Kaelen glanced at her. "It didn't miss you," he said. "It just waited." She smiled. "Then I guess I did the same." By dawn, the fire was only ash and smoke, and the canyon glowed gold beneath the rising sun. Willa stood at the edge, her new camera in hand. The lens caught the first light, and for a heartbeat she saw 2 figures reflected in the glass, hers and Kaelen's side by side, framed by red stone and open sky. She pressed the shutter. The click echoed off the cliffs, sharp and clear. Kaelen turned toward her, one brow raised. "That one for the paper, no," she said softly. "For me." He nodded. "Then don't forget to listen when you look at it." "I won't." As the sun climbed higher, the canyon began to whisper again, not of ghosts or loss this time, but of beginnings. The wind curled around them, carrying voices both old and new, laughter tangled in its breath. And if you stood far enough away, you might have sworn the desert itself was breathing a little easier, like after all its long remembering it had finally found something worth keeping. And so the desert kept their voices not loud, not lost, just quiet and forever there. If you've listened this far, thank you for riding along. Until next time, may the wind be gentle and the road kind beneath your feet.